So there was a time not that long ago when the most free-thinking people in a society, the people with the most questions, with the deepest thirst for knowledge, with the most curiosity went into journalism because you got paid to ask questions and to challenge the prevailing narrative. But sometime in the last 10 years, that just completely inverted, and now the most closed-minded people in society work in journalism, but not as journalists, as gatekeepers, crushing and suppressing anyone who deviates from the approved script of the regime in power. So that's where we find Alex Berenson, a former journalist who asked a lot of inconvenient questions, many of them on this show. So it shouldn't surprise you that the Atlantic magazine, one of the most craven, corrupted pieces of garbage in journalism, has a new cover story out this week, in fact, I believe today, attacking Alex Berenson because he read from a different script, and that can't be allowed. The piece is called "The Pandemic's Wrongest Man." We know Alex Berenson pretty well after a year of talking to him, so we invited him into the studio tonight. He is, of course, the author of Unreported Truths About COVID-19 and Lockdowns, Part 4, Vaccines. He joins us on our set tonight to respond to this predictable, and I don't even know if it's annoying, it's so dumb, but assess this hit piece on you.
Well, they entirely missed the point. Look, if you want to say there's pros and cons with these vaccines, and out in the wild, you can see that they haven't worked quite as well or quite as quickly, certainly, as people hoped in a place like Israel. There was a bad spike in cases in January, and in Britain too. But it looks like, once you get through that first period, there could be some advantages to having a large part of the population vaccinated, even though we don't know how long immunity lasts. And by the way, we know many people have severe side effects from these vaccines. That's clear from both the clinical trials and the real world data. Okay, we can have a real conversation about that. And we can have a conversation about the fact that, the idea that we should have restrictions on people or discourage them from travel or discourage kids from going to school, whether or not they're vaccinated, makes no sense. But the public health establishment and the rest of the media basically don't want to have these conversations. So they're caught in this web of a story that doesn't really make any sense. The vaccines are perfect. They prevent 100% of serious infections and deaths, they say. And yet, at the same time, you must continue to wear your mask after you're vaccinated. You must not hang out with too many people who are not vaccinated after you're vaccinated. And this is the problem. So the problem is that when you sort of pile the lies on top of each other, the lies and the misstatements and the overstatements, things start to break down, and anybody with a brain can see the story you're telling doesn't make sense. The story I'm telling is pretty coherent, and I really do encourage anybody who wants to know where I really stand on this to get the booklet and read it for yourself, because you'll see, I'm not telling you, oh, the vaccine plus 5G will make your brain explode. Okay, that's why they hate me. They hate me because they can't dismiss me, because the arguments I make come out of the clinical trial data, come out of the real world experience in Israel and other countries, and come out of, reasonable scientific questions that people have asked about the mRNA biotechnology behind the Pfizer and Moderna vaccines. And so because I'm not a conspiracy theorist, they hate me more.
It's just so interesting, though, because you are a lone guy with a deep interest in science, a commitment to honesty. If you're wrong, you say so. You're not wedded to some worldview you're trying to protect at all costs. At the same time, you have federally employed public health officials who've gotten a lot of things wrong, who are also defending gain-of-function research on viruses. That's just incredibly dangerous. It can actually destroy mankind. No exaggeration.
No exaggeration.
And no one's even asking any questions about it. But they're attacking you because you deviate from the approved script. I just find that chilling. I do.
Well, I'm very fortunate in that I have a lot of people around the world, actually around the world, who email me sort of quietly and say, you should read this study, you should look at what's happening in Hungary, or you should look at, this paper that just came out of France. And so I have people helping me. But yeah, I do think, look, even if I'm wrong about all this, and I'm not wrong about all of this, it's useful to have me, and it would be useful to have other journalists asking hard questions. Last year, Tucker, we talked about the Wuhan Institute of Virology, and we talked about this idea that it might have leaked from a lab, and oh, that's a conspiracy theory, it's crazy. Well, guess what? The Chinese and the WHO actually went too far when they said that this was more likely to have come from frozen food than the Wuhan Institute of Virology, and even the Biden administration had to do something about that. So before we decide we need to inject every 16, 17, 18, 25-year-old who basically has zero risk from this virus, okay? If you are under 25 or even 30, 40, if you're in reasonable health, you're very, very low risk from this virus. Before we decide we have to mandate or quasi-mandate that, maybe we could ask a few questions about what the side effects are, and about, by the way, if you had this already, maybe your natural immunity means you don't have to get any vaccine.
Well, like, what is the answer to that question? I just have to say, as someone who's read The Atlantic most of my life, was friends with the former editor of it, it was a journal of ideas that challenged you. Now you see in The Atlantic ideas hauled blindfolded into a dark room and executed. I mean, it really is where ideas go to die, where free thinking ends. Like, what? How can you have a country with science and art if the guardians of the conversation are committed to stopping conversation?
I don't know. I don't know. I just know I'm going to keep asking. And honestly, Twitter's been pretty good to me. They've basically allowed me to ask, and I've got a couple 100,000 people on there. You allow me on, you know, Fox allows me on. As I always say when I come on with you, I love to come on with you. I would be glad to come on with CNN or MSNBC,
yes.
Anybody else. Ask me the questions. I can handle myself. You know, this is the people who need to hear this the most are the people who are hearing none of it.
And you're hardly an ideologue. Still don't know what your politics are. You've corrected me a couple of times live on TV. That's fine with me. I mean, I believe in open-mindedness, period. Alex Berenson, I appreciate your coming.
Tucker, thanks for having me.
Thank you. Those people, they're the worst.